The average failure rate of cold calls is roughly 96.5%. That means that reps that do talk to a prospect on the phone have just a 3.5% chance of converting that call. Might sound crazy, right? But how are world-class reps converting closer to 25 and 30% on cold calls? That's 1 in every 3 to 4 connected calls landing in a meeting. My name is Kevin, and my goal is to provide you with world-class strategies and tactics to grow your business with cold outreach. Today, I'm interviewing Matthew Putnam, a cold outbound expert with over a decade of experience in his craft.
You're more likely to get a yes using that line versus the original. Make them feel heard, make them feel understood, and your cold calls will change drastically in such a good way.
So if you're in B2B sales and you're not booking enough meetings with cold calls, buckle up because you're about to learn how to cold call like an expert. Let's jump in. Matthew, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Kevin. Buzzed to be here.
Yeah, we're excited to have you here as well. For the people watching this or listening to this right now, give them a little bit of a background or context around what you do and what got you into cold outreach.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so you know a little bit about myself. I'm an ex-SDR, account exec, and then director of sales development. So my whole world has revolved around cold outreach. I've then gone on to go and train over 3,000 reps and sales leaders on how to be more effective with their cold outreach, and today, head of growth with Prospio.
In your cold calling experience, what has been the biggest shift in the past 5 to 10 years?
There's a couple of things. One of the shifts that stayed the same is all of our cold calls is around basically building on a hook to get the attention of the person we're speaking to then convince them to continue with a conversation with us. Probably the biggest things that have shifted is around how we handle data and actually handle the cold calls. So nowadays, it's about making sure we're having connections on the phone. That's the main thing. So using things like power dialers to dial more phone numbers so that we then get put through to a number that actually picks up versus just waiting one by one on each phone call to then proceed to the next one.
Yeah, back in the day before all these big data providers, you would call local businesses and you'll be put kind of through a gatekeeper where you would be talking to the receptionist, the assistant, whoever it is, and you won't actually get to the decision makers. So do you feel that cold calling kind of shifted in a positive direction with, data providers now being able to find the mobile numbers of those decision makers and contact them directly?
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny because there's the famous Cisco hold music that most cold callers know and love. And nowadays we hear that less and less because we're not calling businesses as much. We are going directly to the decision maker to speak to them either by their phone number or direct name, because just the data nowadays is getting so much better.
And with that being said, like these higher ups, like executives in B2B sales, that's pretty common for you to kind of work with and negotiate with. How do you find talking to an executive differs to, let's say, a mid-level manager when making a cold call?
Well, usually when you're speaking to executives, they're usually the decision maker, whereas mid-level managers, depending on what your solution or service that you offer, are usually going to be the users. So the priorities with each are completely different, and you've got to speak to the different priorities accordingly to get the person on the end of the phone interested. So when we're talking to execs, it's usually about the impact it's going to have on the team, on the business, the top line revenue and so on. Whereas for the mid-level manager, it's going to be more about the experience and how they go about their day-to-day job to then impact those other things.
Right. And I love that you said that, because I think a lot of times, especially SDRs, when they're making cold calls, they kind of treat everyone the same. And like they talk to mid-level managers the same way as they talk to C-suite executives. So in your experience, do you feel that with the help of AI, we're getting the hang of how to communicate more effectively with these different tiers, managers and executives?
I think it all comes down to usually about experience. I see this a lot more with more inexperienced reps. But then as you get more experience, you find out that really, when I'm on a cold call, I'm speaking to an individual person, and it's not about the hundreds of people I'm going to call. So I need to make sure I'm speaking to that individual person about something they actually care about. So when we start blending everyone together, we're not speaking to individual people about what they specifically care about. We're making a rough guess on what everyone likes, which is never going to help. You'll get some wins every now and then. But now people are leveraging AI to research prospects better intent signals, more relevancy. And that's what the game is nowadays. It's not about volume, it's about timing and relevance. I need to find the relevant information about the person to make sure that what I'm going to be talking to them about even makes sense. And then it's got to be correct timing. Are they even in the window to begin a buying process? Because if not, let's have the chat at a later date. And I think once you start mastering those two and the research that comes behind that, you become incredibly more effective with your cold calls.
100% agree. I think if you personalize your message, especially in the opener, I feel like that is the most important step. Like nailing the first 10 to 20 seconds of your cold call is going to determine whether or not you're going to even convert. Let's segue this conversation into that then. What do you feel is the biggest mistakes inexperienced SDRs make in their openers?
One of the more common ones I see is jumping into a call and being like, "Hi Kevin, how are you doing?" Or "Hi Kevin, have I caught you at a bad time?" And these two are some of the ones I see people most guilty of. The first being, "How are you?" The reality is everyone knows that I don't care how you are in that cold call setting, right? Like it's true. We're already kind of starting the call with an element of a lie. And then the other one is, did I catch you at a bad time? You're opening the door for them to shut it really, really easily. Now, there's nothing wrong with asking a question which is yes or no, but this is where we do things like permission-based openers, add a bit of humor in it. Like, "Kevin, look, you're going to hate me for this. This is a cold call, but can I just take 30 seconds to explain why I've specifically called you?" And it's different to, "Have I caught you at a bad time?" "Have I caught you at a bad time?" "Yeah, you have. I can't speak right now. But do you mind if I take 30 seconds to explain why I've specifically called you?" I'm making it about you. It's an element of making you feel special, that I've put some effort into understanding who you are. You're more likely to get a yes using that line versus the original.
And I think that also creates more curiosity too. It's like, do you mind if I take 30 seconds to tell you why I called you specifically? So you're kind of hinting that, okay, maybe you did your research, maybe you know something about them or their company or their role, and you have something that could be relevant to them. Whereas, "Did I catch you at a bad time?" It's like, oh, please. Like anyone who says that, I feel like you automatically perceive them as a salesperson. Like they could almost smell it, right? But are there any other openers that you have seen great success with?
I mean, usually the permission-based is my go-to, especially if you're a newer rep, because it's really easy to get started with, and it just really highlights the numbers game. If I'm not going to go for a permission-based, what I would want to do is add something, lean on that relevancy that we've been talking about. So it'd be like, "Hi Kevin, I've noticed that you've got a couple of SDR roles on LinkedIn, and I've also seen you've got a team of 15 people. Do you mind if you could help me out with something really quick?" And then what I'm doing is I'm coming in with a bit, like I'm asking for help. Us humans, we love to help people. So you were kind of playing on that emotion, but I've also led with some research, just initial research. And that could be all sorts of things. Like I would really suggest the viewers like really study intent signals and like coupling up intent signals and then using that as your relevance line. Like, "This is what I've seen, and therefore there's a reason why I'm calling you. Do you mind if you help me out with that a little bit?" And then I'll come in and explain, "Well, look, Kevin, I usually speak to people regarding X, Y, and Z about this. Usually this pops up when I see 2 SDR roles, but you've already got a huge team in place, so ramping is going to be an issue and stuff like that. Is this something you've come across previously?" And then I get the conversation going. But the point is, it does the same thing. I'm kind of getting to a yes, no, but it's a different way of doing it. Come in with some relevancy, ask for a little bit of help. You can also flip that one out and push that to one side, and then come in with a question like linked to your relevancy that you've researched.
I think that is key right there. It's leading with relevant context, right? If you can demonstrate that you've done your homework at the start of the call, they're more likely to be receptive.
The reality is, like, we all, as human beings, we all want to feel understood and heard. That's the reality. So you as a cold caller, we need to put ourselves we are the side character in this scenario, and the person we're calling is the main character, and we need to make them feel understood to some degree. So you've got to make sure you're speaking their language about the things that they live, so that you can convince them that you understand their world for them to even continue the conversation. So that's the whole game. Tell them what they're experiencing. Then they'll hear you out if you've got something compelling that can help with something, And as long as it's linked, brilliant. So make them feel heard, make them feel understood, and yet your cold calls will change drastically in such a good way.
Just to reiterate the second point that you mentioned, it's, can you help me out with something? A lot of times people are more inclined to help them. So you can even start your cold call like, hey, I was on your website and I noticed that your contact us button was broken. Do you mind helping me out with something? And now they're going to be more inclined. They're like, they're on my website. They noticed something. Let me see if I can help them out. And then you can lead with, let's say you're selling web design services. You could say, yeah, so I work with other companies in the whatever industry or niche. And a lot of times when they are trying to get customers to contact them, 80% of the time when businesses do not have that contact us button working, they lose out on a sale or a potential customer. Have you noticed that for your business? Now it's a conversation rolling. You're not saying, I help businesses do this, they can make this, and would you be interested? That's a totally different frame of asking that question. You're making it about them rather than about your services. Like you're trying to solve a problem. Do you feel like making it about them and trying to solve their problems is the best approach?
Yeah, I think you have to. And also, let's remember what the goal of a cold call is. Like most people just assume it's to book a meeting, but reality is it isn't. It's to qualify if someone's a good fit or not. Booking a meeting is a secondary goal of a cold call, but I need to basically speak to someone and go, great, can we actually help you so that you're going to see value and become a long-term customer? If yes, let's understand that in detail and then book a meeting. If no, well, probably should never call this person again unless the situation changes. So my first job is to qualify. Cool, we've got the opener and I now need to convince them that I understand their world. So that's when I would come in with, look, I spend most of my day speaking to job role about specific problem X, Y, and Z. And I've noticed that usually when what you're going through right now happens, this problem becomes really bad. I was just wondering, is this something you're starting to experience? And then we're going to get the qualification beginning. We're going to understand what their world is. So, hopefully at this point, the yeses continue. And each time I ask one of these questions, yes, that's something we're starting to see. And then we can start understanding if it's a huge pain now or if it's a growing pain. And then we've got to understand what the pain is. And then we've got to start understanding what the consequence of said pain is so that later in the call, I've got all this information now. I've got all this valuable golden nuggets of info that I'm then going to use to arm my pitch. So there is so much logic and emotion that they want to book that next meeting. Brilliant. So if I could solve those two problems whilst making sure that there are no other issues here or that these targets are still hit, would that make sense? Would it be worth me showing you how that's even possible? And then cool, because I've loaded it with so much information that we know is a problem for them, then we'll likely say yes to booking the meeting. If they say no to a lot of these things, well, there's nothing wrong with being like, look, well, to be honest, I don't think we can help with that. Or you don't need help, and really good on you. If things change in the future, let's connect. I'll share some information that can help you completely free, no obligation, if things change in the future. That's still a good call in my opinion, because it means that I've qualified someone that I know that I'm reach out in 9 months' time, or don't reach out again. Let's reassess our ICP, ideal customer profile, and we rinse and repeat.
I think the biggest thing that you mentioned is not every call should be resulted in a meeting. I think a lot of SDRs forget that. They are so obsessed with making their dials and then trying to book a meeting with everyone they connect to. And that's the wrong approach because not everyone's going to qualify for your offer. So the goal of a cold call should be to start a conversation. Treat them as human to begin with. Don't just treat them as another dial or another lead or another number. Like if you can build that rapport at the beginning of the call, that's going to take you miles ahead and book way more meetings than if you were to just blast through your list and try to book a meeting with every single person. So let's transition now into objections. You're oftentimes going to hear, I'm not interested, or send me an email. Do you have any tips or a framework that you follow when it comes to handling objections on a cold call?
Yeah, usually whenever I'm faced with an objection, I want to use this as an opportunity to learn information. And objections usually fall into two categories. If it is one, qualify if it is one or not. Or is it a real objection they're actually facing, and then we can also use that information, right? One of the really common ones would be like, look, I'm just not interested. Like, send me an email. And the easiest way is completely agree with that. Look, I completely get that. Of course, most people aren't interested when I call them for the first time. This is the first time we've ever spoke. And I can send you that email, but look, do you mind if I ask you one question just so I can tailor it to you? So I can make it more specific to your situation. You get a no to that, it's quite clearly a fob off. They just want you off the phone. If they say yes to that, really well done. You've just started the whole conversation again. Now, you can't push it too much, but you can get a couple of questions in there, use that information for a later outreach touch point. Or if you're really skilled, maybe you can turn the whole conversation around because at first they just weren't open to hearing you out. You've said something relevant and compelling. Now they're like, okay, maybe we'll talk about this. But I think this is one of the easiest ways. Just acknowledge what they're saying. Like, we don't have budget for this. Look, I totally get that. Most of the people I speak to for the first time, they do not have budget allocated for this specific thing. But out of interest, can I just understand your current setup for this already? Are you currently allocating money to solve said problem? Cool, how does that look? And we're beginning the conversation again. And also I'm agreeing with them, right? So it's like, I'm not being defensive. I'm not challenging them. I'm not saying, no, you're wrong. What I'm doing is I'm going like, look, get that. Completely understand. Not even a problem my end. Completely fair. Just so I understand. Or my favorite line, honestly, is just so I get my little head around it. I make myself small and defenseless. I'm just trying to understand your situation. I'm trying to understand you better.
I love that you brought that up because I think a lot of times whenever reps, they get an objection, they see that as a dead end. And I like to see objections as a roadblock that you can maneuver around. First step is always to agree with them. Doesn't matter what they say, you have to lower their guard. So if they say, I'm not interested, and you say, for sure, I totally get that you're not interested, you probably call me if you were. So just so no one calls you again, is it because you're already doing this in-house, or are you currently outsourcing it and you don't need this service? Now you're agreeing with them, and you're also redirecting the focus of the conversation. And I want to take this conversation to the importance of tonality, especially when you're talking to high-level executives. What separates the top performers versus the inexperienced SDRs when it comes to tonality?
Well, one, top performers have practiced what they're saying over and over again, because people hear how you say things quicker than what you're actually saying, right? So if you sound deflated, slouched, bored, that's what they're going to hear. It doesn't really matter the words you say. They're going to hear someone sounding deflated or bored. Whereas if they hear someone who sounds energetic but curious about them, then they're going to hear, okay, well, this person's asking me a question about me. They want to understand who I am. So I think that's going to be one of the biggest things between top performers and newer reps is that, top performers, they really work on tonality, how they actually say the words. That's so much more important than we think. Practice your opener. How is it sounding? Am I trying to be funny? Am I injecting humor into what I'm saying? Because you've got to bring energy at that point, or otherwise if you make a joke and you sound bored, it's not going to be funny, right? So that's probably one of the key differences.
I've seen so many different openers with different tonalities. Do you find that often where they're busy, they don't have too much time to beat around the bush? So it's important that not only you have the right tonality, but you also don't drag this call on for a long period of time.
Partly. I mean, it depends how interested they are in the thing you want to speak to them about, right? If it's a really interesting topic to them and it's a real problem, they're probably going to want to speak to you quite a lot. But before we even get to that, you've got to work on the tonality anyway, right? So, yes, I do agree. And I think it's like what your example is about it's more of a curious tone. I'm curious about something and I'm just trying to understand a little bit more about it. There's nothing wrong with sounding confident. It's just you've got to be confident in the words you're saying. And that's the key there with the confidence, because if I say something I'm a bit nervous about it, like, I am, when I speak to sales leaders like yourself all the time, they always have a problem around ramping new sales reps, and I can solve that problem. It's very different to Kevin. I speak about this all the time actually, and the problem you're facing is a common one. A lot of people face it, but it's also a really easy problem to solve. It's a completely different thing. One is like, I'm clearly not very experienced. The other is, I've been there, I've done it. Don't worry, I'm confident we can solve that problem. Huge difference between the two. So much more impactful, the second one.
Yes, it's more of a downward, nonchalant tone where you're like, yeah, I've done this before. It's nothing new to me. It's about how you say things with confidence, but you're not overly expressing that confidence. Like if you're saying, hey, how are you? Like you're sounding more of an up tone, then they can kind of sense that you're probably just another salesperson. So play around with different tonalities. And I think that the more confident but nonchalant way is definitely going to work a lot better in most of your calls. Now, Matt, I want to talk about your experience specifically because you've been cold calling for a very long time now. And I'm sure you've cold called people from different countries. Have you noticed different executives from different countries in how they speak, depending on the country that you're calling? What has your experience been with that?
There are 100% cultural nuances with different countries, and we've got to take that into account, and that should be part of your ideal customer profile building. Some countries are a lot chattier than other countries. You know, the classic one with the UK is everyone assumes we're really grumpy all the time. It can also be true, but when I talk about this, I think it's more just to prepare yourself so you can match your style to who you're going to speak to. Reality is people are people have different personality types, different roles you probably outreach to have different personality types, and that's going to be the more thing to focus on. It's like, who is the person I'm speaking to on the other end? Because someone who is a sales leader, maybe a more driven role who wants to get to the point, whereas someone who's speaking to a salesperson, they're probably going to love to chat for ages, or someone in marketing will love it. Whereas someone in IT may be all about the stats and figures and so on. So, you know, I've kind of got to, it's more about shifting to the person you're speaking to and matching their style. And you will understand that as a call goes on. You'll understand what annoys someone, what doesn't annoy someone, what they respond to. And as you call more people, you'll start to see the pattern. Okay, well, this type of people I'm calling out to, this is the style that suits them. This is when I get the most responses and positive conversations. So this is how I speak to them. If I change role or start targeting someone new, I need to start that whole process again, because if I'm shifting from a sales leader to a head of IT, it's a completely different conversation. And I shouldn't assume it's going to be the same.
Yes, I think that's so important too, because all the tips here, like your role specifically, you talk to mainly sales leaders. So if someone IT watching this and they're going to apply these tips, it might not necessarily get them the results that they're hoping for. So really depends on the role and type of personality that you're speaking with. And as you mentioned, IT is more like data driven or like statistics. Talking about metrics, what are some good benchmarks an SDR who's currently not doing so well should be aiming for? Like, let's say they're full-time cold calling, 8 hours a day, making like 200 dials.
Yeah, well, I'll actually shift this to the other end first. And I think it's all about the conversion metrics, right? So if you've got a target of X number of meetings, we now need to understand how many conversations do you need to have to book in that many meetings? And a good conversion rate is between 40 to 50% of all conversations. I have 5 conversations, I book in 2 to 3 meetings. That'd be in a really, really strong metric to run with. Cool, so 5 conversations. How many dials do I need to make to hit the 5 conversations? And then that comes down to things like data quality, or using a power dialer, maybe where you're calling, you know, how ready the data is for the industry that you're targeting. But then you do the maths back from there. But this is where you can sometimes get reps who could do 30 calls in a day and book in their 2 meetings, which is great, whilst other reps sometimes have to do 150, 200. So focus on the latter and then make the start of the calculation fit, because the other thing is, if you have those conversations or you're not having those conversations, you then want to up the number of people you're calling. It's not like, okay, well, I did 30 yesterday and booked 2 meetings, I'm going to do 30 today. I didn't book any meetings, but I do 30 dials a day, because that just doesn't make any sense, does it? So focus on the output, and then you'll get, over time, as you get more data, you'll work out what your conversion rate is. Usually 100 calls, you're going to probably have about 5 conversations. So 5 to 10% connect rate, fantastic. And then if you've got a conversion rate of 40 to 50%, you're in a really, really healthy spot.
What you just mentioned about 40 to 50% of conversations in rather than percentage of dials. The connect rate is so low right now. So you're going to make like dozens of dials before you may even speak to one person. So have those conversations and use the tips that we've talked about, like practice your openers, tailor it to that person, and actually start a conversation with them. Like, see whether or not your offer is going to be right for that person. Because sometimes, even if you have a good conversation, it might not always land in a meeting, and that's okay. Maybe timing's off, maybe they don't have a need for it, and that's fine. You should always end the conversation with a high note in terms of, I now have a new potential connect, and we're on good terms, rather than them potentially cussing you out or having a very icky feeling about salespeople or cold callers in general after that conversation. So Matt, I want to ask you a couple last questions. SDRs that hit their quotas versus those who don't. What's the key factor that separates the two?
Brilliant question. And it literally comes down to the practice. So a top rep will practice everything they're saying. They'll practice their tone. They will do weekly objection handling practice sessions, whether with their manager or other teams. But they're doing this every single week. They're sharpening the knife, so to speak. And it's that being part of their routine. Just assuming you get good one week and then fine, I don't need to develop anymore. That's not how this goes. Like our brains forget things. We wake up on a Monday morning, we haven't had our coffee and we're tired and we forget the words we need to say. But getting that little practice session in. So I've got my tonality, my lines are perfected. So when I get that call, pick up, I'm ready. Kevin, thank you for picking up the phone. Look, you're going to be a bit annoyed with me. This is a cold call. But I promise you, I've researched a lot about your situation. So could I just take 30 seconds? Get the words practiced so that when the call does happen, you're ready to strike. And that is the main thing. It's the constant practice of all of those core bits of a cold call, so to speak.
Yes, like practice is so underrated. And just imagine every single time that you say your lines is when you're actually having a conversation with someone. You're not going to be as confident in your lines. You might stutter, you might trip up on some words, and you're going to come across as someone who's inexperienced versus someone who's done this before. If they've done this thousands of times and practiced thousands of times, they're going to know exactly what to say. Like they're not going to be looking at the screen and seeing, oh, what do I have to say here when someone picks up, right? So practice, role play, that's going to make a world of a difference. With your experience, how often would you say the ratio of practice versus actually making the calls is a good benchmark for someone who wants to get good at cold calling?
If I've got 2 to 4 hours of cold calling booked in for a day, I'm going to be spending half an hour in the morning just getting ready, stretching all the muscles, getting my voice ready, getting the words practiced slightly. That's probably even overkill to some extent, but like a little half an hour just getting into it, I think is incredibly helpful. With regards to like actually doing like the training sessions, you've got to be booking in 2 hours a week as a minimum for these things. And fun enough, you'll find that you'll then become in the top 1% of the people who are actually doing these cold calls. Block out the time in your calendar. Make sure you're super religious with it and it's very strict, and give it a few weeks and you'll see a difference completely.
With that being said, I know you mentioned practice is a huge thing before you do your dials, but is there any other thing that you do that kind of gets you in that mindset to make those cold calls? Or is it just simply, no, you just have to pick up the phone and just make that dial?
You do have to just pick up the phone and dial, but I love to make sure I'm standing. Get yourself a cool headset of some sort. Open up the diaphragm, right? So when you stand, your shoulders are back, you're relaxed, you feel your lungs. It'll already have a huge impact on your tone versus me sitting down slouching. Standing, walk around, they call it the Superman pose, feel powerful, but it will actually get you more in the mood to like, I'm ready to call people. And then also I just remind myself, like whatever happens today, none of this is personal. Whether someone loves what I'm about to say, I'm going to be happy about it. But if they're unhappy about something I'm going to say, like at the end of the day, that's not directed at me personally. It's just part of the game that we're playing in sales. And remember, I'm just qualifying people. Are they a good fit? Are they not a good fit? And then putting them in the appropriate bucket to do the appropriate thing after that. That's all it is.
So 2 things I want to touch upon. First thing is when you're standing, you're changing your physical state. And that's going to make a huge impact in how you talk, how you deliver yourself, in your messaging, in your tones. That's going to shift the way how your prospects are going to view you. And second thing, you have to detach your self-worth to these calls. And I think a lot of times they take it personal, they take rejections or not booking any meetings, and they feel that, oh, I suck at this. I'm not made out for this. I'm never going to book meetings with anyone during cold calls, whatever it is. And all that negative self-talk isn't helping you at all, because at the end of the day, cold calling is a skill. It's something that you can work on and practice over time to get better at. So if you feel like you do suck at cold calls, take that as a sign and do something about it. Do more practice, do more role plays, maybe look up to some mentors, maybe watch YouTube videos and follow the tips that are given. in your industry. So never attach your personality or self-worth to the outcome of the cold call, because even the top reps, they still get no's, they still get rejected. It's just a part of the game. So just remember that. One final question, is there any other final golden nuggets, tips, expert advice that you would give to the audience watching right now?
Yeah, where possible, I think one of the most effective things you can do cold calling is to gamify the whole process. And it ties in a lot of the things that we've spoken about on this call today. So one of the ways I like to do is I'd allocate points to specific outcomes. And then, you can do this with your colleagues. Who gets the most points in the day, they get a prize. Get your whole team involved, get your sales leader involved. Put money bounties up or free lunches and things like that together. And then we can have more fun with what we're doing. So what you could do is you could allocate 1 point for having a conversation, right? Because we want more conversations. We could allocate 2 points to a specific amount of qualification that's been collected on the call, and then we allocate 3 points for getting the meeting booked. And then what we're doing is we're putting the points around the things that we need to get better at. We need to be having cold call, we need to be having conversations, we need to be qualifying more, and then obviously we need to book meetings. So it drives the right behavior for yourself, for your teammates. They're the things you really want to get good at. And trust me, once you start getting a bit competitive with it, you start forgetting about all the rejection, because it's like, well, I need to win the competition. So I'm picking the phone straight back up again after that call.
Yes. And I think that that's a great advice right there, because if you already hate cold calls, and if you love playing games, you love competition, now it's almost neutralizing the behavior, and it reinforces your ability to make those cold calls. Because if you have a fear of cold calling or whatever, and now you have more of an incentive to make those cold calls, it's going to be a fun way, a little fun competition for you to do those dials, get those meetings booked. Cold calling does get a bad rep for being mundane, being boring. If you can make it ever so slightly a bit more enjoyable, then in the long term, it's going to be so much more worth it. So Matt, thanks again for giving your expert advice on cold calling. I'm sure the audience would appreciate it. Where can they find you if they want to follow you or find more of your content?
Yeah, well, look, pleasure to be here. Happy to do this again. And look, if you want to chat about it, either pop some questions in the comments of this video or Matthew Putnam on LinkedIn. Let's connect there, and I'm happy to answer any questions and help.
Connect with them on LinkedIn and let us know if you want to see Matthew again on this channel, and let us know what your biggest key takeaway is down in the comments. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and we will see you in the next video.